Pixar is known for their likable heroes like Buzz Lightyear and Dory in The Incredibles, but the famed animation studio also has a roster of villains who have left a memorable impression. They've proven to be sinister, conniving, and ruthless in their plans to win out over the protagonist. And I'm going to count down who I think are the most well-written and strongest villains in the Pixar catalog. Now, due to the nature of some of these villains, there are some spoilers for certain movies. So, just a warning if you've not seen every movie made by Pixar. So, who do I consider the studio's best baddies? Charles Muntz in Up. The childhood hero of Carl Fredricksen, his thirst for adventure seemed noble, and one could argue his initial desire to explore the world came with good intentions. However, we see his Captain Ahab-like chase for Colorful Bird warp his mind as he becomes more obsessive. Pete Docter cleverly showed Muntz's devious side when he comes across Carl and Russell in the South American jungle. At that point, he becomes a genuine threat. Even at his advanced age, he proves to be quite the fighter, and his command of his airship leads to an exciting action climax. It also helps that Christopher Plummer delivers an excellent vocal performance, capturing the needed obsessive nature of the character. Evelyn Deavor in Incredibles 2. One of the themes in this sequel involved the importance of equal rights for everyone. Unfortunately, there will always be those in society who seek to not give certain people those rights. And that's what makes Deavor a compelling villain. Her plan to hypnotize superheroes to do her bidding and destroy their image once and for all was a devious one, and there's definitely a rooting interest in The Incredibles, especially Elastigirl, defeating her. Brad Bird used some clever wordplay for her name, so maybe the big revelation that she was Screenslaver was not meant to be that big of a shock. Nonetheless, she was able to hide her intentions well through her seemingly friendly interactions with Elastigirl, and Catherine Keener did a great job in the role. Ernesto de la Cruz in Coco. While I did see Ernesto's true nature coming, he nonetheless proved to be a hateful villain, as we witness how far he goes to accomplish his goal for stardom. Killing the true writer of a touching song and then stealing it definitely makes him one of the most despicable antagonists to appear in a Pixar film. That also ties in well with one of the themes of Coco, which is about the dangers of hero worship. Benjamin Bratt was able to portray Ernesto's charms, and when Miguel finds out his big secret, he appropriately takes on a more sinister attitude. I do have to admit, his rendition of Remember Me is actually really catchy and fun to listen to, although that was probably intentional on the part of Lee Unkrich and songwriters Robert and Kristen Anson-Lopez. Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2. Don't worry, this list will not only consist of surprise villains. With Stinky Pete, the Toy Story series answer the question of what happens when a toy is left unsold, and what effect does this have on them. Kelsey Grammer really showed the pain and anger Stinky Pete felt about this, as well as the wrong-headed reaction he has. The movie also depicts the careful manipulation he has over Jessie the cowgirl, and even the way he messes with Woody to convince him to go to a museum in Japan. We have to believe he is a trustworthy figure when Woody meets him, and the filmmakers succeed in that goal. He does eventually prove to be hateable, and thus makes it all the more satisfying when Andy's toys ultimately find a child for Pete, who is his worst nightmare. Chef Skinner in Ratatouille. As voiced by Ian Holmes, Skinner is maybe one of the funniest villains in Pixar's filmography. A large credit goes to the animators, give him all sorts of hilarious facial expressions as he tries to prove Linguini is keeping a rat under his tube. Through the character, Brad Bird also comments on the underhanded ways in which companies choose to profit from a recognizable name. He's also shown stopping at nothing to prevent Linguini from inheriting the restaurant, right down to getting him drunk. And Bird even mounts an excellent action sequence, with Skinner chasing after Remy on the streets of Paris. Skinner may come across as a stereotypical French chef at first, but there are a lot more layers to him than his accent. Otto in WALL-E. Clearly inspired by HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, Otto poses a legitimate threat to Wally and Eve. We see how the directives programmed into him have an effect on his decision-making as he follows them to a T, but maybe too much. While Wally and Eve are voiced by actual humans with their voices computer manipulated, the electronic Macintalk was used to generate Otto's speech patterns, which adds to his cold personality. Otto is essentially the opposite of Wally, who has found his humanity. Otto thinks he's helping the humans, but is really responsible for their lack of a proper life on board the Axiom. That moment when Captain McCree finally stands up and takes control of Otto and the Axiom is definitely one of the most inspiring moments in the film. Hopper in A Bug's Life. Hopper is representative of the sort of force who thinks they can push the little guy around and does everything in his power to drain any hope they have left. He's definitely a threat, and one can understand why the ants fear him. The character of Hopper also proves to be a clever twist on the ant and the grasshopper fable, as we see what might have happened had the grasshopper not learned a lesson. Hopper is portrayed as smart and calculating, unlike the grasshoppers he leads, as even he is aware what can happen, were the ants to realize they are powerful in numbers. There's also something about his design which adds to his devilish nature. Although, let's be honest, it's difficult not to sound evil when Kevin Spacey provides your voice. Randall in Monsters, Inc. Of the many monsters who work in that factory, Randall is definitely one of the most impressive with his camouflage abilities. He really is someone who loves scaring children, and even his co-workers too, with his frequent showing off to Mike and Sully. Steve Buscemi brought both a comedic sensibility and a needed menace to Randall. With his character, the filmmakers also had to create someone you would believe would be okay with kidnapping children. And yeah, Randall is not a monster to be trusted. The animators did an amazing job of portraying his powers, as well as the slick way he moves. In a movie filled with creative monster designs, Randall definitely stands out as one of the best. Syndrome in The Incredibles. The ultimate fanboy, Syndrome represents what happens when someone takes rejection the wrong way. His plan to prop himself up while making superheroes more ordinary is actually quite a clever plot, and Syndrome is shown to be very smart with his technology and the way he amasses a fortune out of it. His private island remains one of the most memorable locations in any Pixar film for a reason. Brad Bird did not shy away from showing how many superheroes Syndrome killed to get to Mr. Incredible, which makes him a real threat and someone who would need more than just punching to defeat. Jason Lee was both funny and chilling when voicing Syndrome, and his line, "When everyone is super, no one will be," definitely stands as one of the best pieces of dialogue in a film filled with a lot of great dialogue. Now, before I get to my number one choice, I want to talk about the idea of who is a villain, because there are some Pixar characters who could be classified as villains, but are they? Sid in Toy Story, for example, is probably a villain from the point of view of Woody and Buzz, but he's really just a child who messes with and reassembles toys. He does not know they're sentient. The dentist taking away Nemo jumpstarts the plot of Finding Nemo, but I would not classify him as a villain. He even mentions doing it because he thought Nemo was lost and lonely. Darla is a bit more of a question mark, though, as she does mistreat fish, but more because she's irresponsible rather than an outright villain. Gabby Gabby in Toy Story 4 is an interesting case, as she's shown doing a number of bad things, but considering what happens in the third act and her decisions there, I don't think she qualifies as a villain. Anyway, my number one Pixar villain is Lotso in Toy Story 3. The villains featured on this list really are despicable, but I think Lotso represents maybe the most loathsome of them all. He proves to be quite the dictator due to his control of the daycare and the way he creates fear among the toys. Lotso is essentially what would have happened had Woody gone the wrong path upon becoming jealous of Buzz. As the film goes on, he becomes more and more hateful, especially with his treatment towards Andy's toys. The daycare escape scenes succeeded in being tense, as you never know when Lotso and his minions will strike. Ned Beatty also deserves a lot of credit for his vocal performance. There's an especially subtle touch he does, where his voice gets higher the more fanatical his words become. Of course, the absolute worst thing Lotso does is almost cause the toys to burn in an incinerator. There's a point in the climax where you think maybe he's changed his tune, and instead he leaves the toys to perish. I'm pretty sure every single person in the audience despised that strawberry-smelling bear after that moment. They actually sell Lotso stuffed bears at the Disney store, but what child is going to want him after sitting through Toy Story 3? Thankfully he gets his comeuppance, although I never before wanted to see a teddy bear get run over. Lee Unkrich, Michael Arndt, and the rest of the team behind the movie really did create an excellent villain who proved quite hateable, and that's why he takes the number one spot on the list. But let me know in the comments who you think the best Pixar villains are, and I'll see you next time.